What does collaboration look like when it's led by women, without being reduced to care alone? How do we honor creative practices that are both tender and technical, communal and experimental, especially when they stretch across the worlds of art, technology, and social change? In this session, I invite you to sit with a collective that is reimagining what collaboration can do, not by reproducing what's expected of women-led spaces, but by expanding the blueprint, building tech that listens, mapping community differently, and asking harder questions of equity, infrastructure, and voice. In 2022 and 2023, I joined hands with the Art Meets Collective as they built their MVP, a digital platform to connect artists and cultural practitioners across Africa. Imiphindo kwaXhosa was on its own journey, tracing Xhosa dress archives through memory, land, and ancestral rhythm. Our paths crossed over shared questions of visibility, memory, and cultural infrastructure, and the collaboration that followed felt both natural and necessary. What emerged was more than a contribution. It was an experiment in open flow collaboration. Rather than a top-down enabler, this team of 5 core members led with a firm tenderness, inviting rigorous invention and mutual learning at every turn. Art Meets is not just a platform, it's a living archive of women-led collaboration. Their methodology asks, how can technology be imbued with care, woven into community contexts, and shaped by the very people it serves? In this conversation, Michaela Limbers, Tammy Langtree, Precious Mhone, and Toriso Moseneke take us behind the build into the deeper intention behind the Art Meets app. What you'll hear is a trace of their thinking, a shared space that allowed them to test, to reflect, to reimagine what digital tools could do when grounded in care and held in community. This is a glimpse into how they gather, document, and share differently.
My personal, but perhaps we agree, is that to talk to women in startup is a bit too specific as a gender issue, where maybe there are bigger issues or questions to discuss, like the characteristics of the work we do, consideration, caring approaches, collective or collaborative, and what that looks like, or how and why this works. Also some information on being a startup and what does that mean. Great input on the topic of culture and technology and the gaps or tensions and approaches. And then our talking points, which we discussed, would be, we had something technical like an app, which didn't have a community context to test with. So to have someone to work in a deeper level as a go-between or to contextualize or case study, which could be developed, was incredible and necessary. Maybe this is referring us to a methodology that we use. Like, how do you go from an app or an object or a technology and you impart it, ingrain it, develop it for a community context? And is there a methodology we use to get to that? Then the long-term collaboration, which meant that we understood each other's work and could refine and grow and develop together. Then the tension of technology to community. How is technology an inclusive kind of platform or thing? And then how can we think about technology and futuring and technology and need? We were testing our perceptions and opinions of who we so-called want on the app and what so-called matters for the app. AFRI are a fashion institute and we are visual arts focused, which was the maybe tension or breakdown between the two, the one thing that we wanted and then what the best actually working group that we actually got in the end. This allowed for reassessing what determines who will be on there and being able to work through partnerships to understand that and negotiate the terms of being on the app. Then we considered the territory the app could cover, speaking to geography and how it's imagined through the app or with the app, and the people who occupy the space geographically or socially, or in terms of who the community is. And I think this was very particular in CVUS case. Then women-led spaces as women in collaboration and care. Do we care and consider, can we discuss the characteristics of the work and not the gendering of the work? And then we just added culture and technology was a critical angle to include. Cool. Who wants to kick us off with the intro or just the hi, my name is?
Okay, I'll go. Okay, I'm Michaela, and I was the project manager for the art meetup alongside Teresa, working directly with the developers and the designers for the app.
My name is Tammy, and I was a consultant, I guess. Although I've been working with Art Meets as an organization, as a collective for a while, but in this project in relation to the app, I was working as a consultant and maybe a facilitator. And that was to work between the project managers as well as think about the role of some of the focus groups and the kind of progression of the project itself.
Hi, my name is Precious. I'm a member of the Art Meets collective on this project. Yeah, I think I had a bit of a consulting capacity, working mainly on supporting with social media and holding that space of translating to a public what we were working on and what we were doing and our ideas and our thinking.
Hi everyone, my name is Toriso and I'm a creative cultural consultant who focuses on project management. I joined Art Meets during the build of the MVP and yeah, as a project manager, and I've been with them since.
Art Meets is a collective of people who have been working together for a number of years. The format of Art Meets changes over the years. So where in the beginning it was very much related to making space outside formal, art institutions, art educational spaces and art galleries, for example, but making alternative space where people can negotiate the terms of their work and their professional relationships with each other, recording artists' practices and work in order to better reflect what was happening in the city of Cape Town at the time. And I think that project has grown in some ways to document and record artist practice over time. But also what has been important is to keep working and networking groups within the arts. So to organize around a project where those involved see a need. Art Meets also has a very important approach to the question of art and technology or art and documentation. So the phrase connect, collaborate, record is like an anchor or a hinge that we use to think about the work that we do. And so during COVID, the knee-jerk reaction was to critically think about the technologies that are around and that we're using and thinking of and developing, and to look at something that Art Meets had developed at one point, which was an app, a connecting and networking app, and to imagine what that could become after a jumpstart like COVID, and how it could attend to the needs of artists and artist communities during that time, especially responding to the digital divide, for example. And so we received funding from the NAC, the National Arts Council, in 2022 now? 2023.
2020, end of 2022.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we received funding to build the app at the end of 2022 after working with Mandla, who is a UX designer, for about 6 months. We were having workshops, kind of working through our ideas to see what the app would be, kind of preliminary workshops before the design process actually starts. And obviously at the time we didn't know where it was going to go or how, because we didn't have any capital. We received a grant from BASA and the DAC to actually be able to build a team and move forward with designing and building the app, which was really a great moment because that's always something that is quite a challenge in the space, and it's a very expensive undertaking. Yeah, so then we started putting together a team, and Tammy Precious and I were already working together, and we needed someone to help manage the project and come on board, and so we got in touch with Toriso.
Yeah.
So you were kind of already committed before.
Well, I was just supporting. And then, yeah, if we were to be successful, then the idea was that I applied, didn't I? Like, I was considered at the end of the day, yeah, to join the team. I didn't just join because of our previous working relationship, through Connect.hubs, you know, I think I offered my support to look at the application, and then yeah, my name was still considered to join the team as a project manager.
Yeah, I think it was really tricky putting a team together for something like this, of almost building something we've never built before, in this way, like step by step, block by block, but then also imagining what kind of skills we needed, what kind of atmosphere we needed in the working relationship. I mean, like Michaela said, we'd all worked together, Precious, Michaela, and myself, in an institution, in like very in an infrastructure, in a professional infrastructure. But our friendship grew beyond that, and our kind of values and principles and ways of working grew beyond that. And so there was something like just innate in the way that we worked with each other, and yeah, flow through work. And so it was a bit nerve-wracking, but also exciting to bring people into a team and to see how would we find each other, and how would we find those flows and working rhythms. And Toriso,
Can I just also add something? Sorry.
yeah.
Just to say, I liked how Toriso phrased that by saying she sort of came in to collaborate or to support. And I think that is already touching on this idea of how we build our working relationships, how, like, our sort of methodology towards a collaborative or a supportive work environment, and how that happens instinctually.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to add that it's been really great working with Toriso, because she's very much about a team spirit, about working with each other, about how to negotiate the next steps of a project, how to find gaps, and to step into those gaps and connect the team as well. And you've given a lot of stability and focus to the work that we do. Yeah, so it's been really easy and really special working with you. So, okay, maybe let's take I don't want to say a spicy angle, but one of the tensions that we were discussing at the last kind of brainstorm was the issue of why do we make this a gendered concern? It's like women's work must be care work, women's work must be collaborative, women's work must be, generous and welcoming, which maybe not everyone, but this is the point of the conversation, is kind of questioning, does it need to be a gender concern? Is it the work of women to solve business issues? And And do we apply that? Or did we just wake up one day and look at each other and go, hey, we're all women? That's kind of, or femmes, maybe, not
Yeah.
to be too specific, but yeah.
I mean, I think it goes back to this thing of how do you gender work, right? And it stemmed from what we said in one of our brainstorming sessions of they're very specific call outs, they're very specific grant opportunities that are related to gender. And then is that a question of a lack of visibility of women, or is that putting women in the specific or women-led spaces rather into this very specific role of being expected to commune with care, right? Which I don't know is a prerequisite for others. And so is it cart before the horse in terms of if you are not the space, are you prioritizing care? Or if you are of a women-led space, are you naturally going to have that? Or I don't know, like it's this interesting, I wouldn't call it a tension, but this, yeah, egg before the chicken, cart before horse thing of what comes first, the care, and then it just so happens that women create it better, or is it because we're women that we're expected to lead with care? I'm not answering a question, but I think it's more of a provocation of is this an expectation that other people or mixed teams don't have of each other, or grant providers or spaces that offer support don't expect of others, or mixed groups? So is that a difficult space to put yourself in? Because if you are not a woman-led team, can you also not do that?
Yeah, it's funny. To make it personal, my mother and Flora, who has been, I guess, cleaning our home, being part of our family for many years, were discussing yesterday the fact that my mother's been in Johannesburg for 24 years now. And she came as like a single mom type of thing to the city and was like, oh yeah, I'm just going to be here for a year and a half. She ended up being here for 24 years, which was like an interesting, funny thing for them to have a conversation on, because they were saying, this wasn't possible many years ago. And so there is, of course, a gender turn, but there's also, of course, the expectation that gender revolutionizes the workplace. And so, yeah, this assumption that notions of care, community, collaboration come with this revolution of the workplace. Yeah, and like you said, whether other teams, mixed teams, differently gendered teams would be able to do that or not do that.
It actually reminds me of like just a bit of research that's been out there about how, women-led organizations or organizations where women are leaders, there's like a huge transformation just in terms of success, but also the environment as well, the working environment and how it's very different in comparison to where there are men in leadership positions. But I think in relation to art meets, and I don't know, Michaela, maybe you can touch on this because I didn't have any say or in who was selected in the beginning in terms of like the building of the team, right? That would work on the Art Meets app project. But when I joined, I didn't necessarily see like, this gendering thing going on just to tick boxes, and I know that when we talk about what's this funding opportunities and funding applications right now, there are a lot of tick boxes that we need to tick, I think also based on, the sustainable development goals, etc. But when I joined, I think there was a very good balance, and there's still a very good balance of, um, the gender groups, if I can say that. And interesting enough, I think when we look at it also from a technical side, I remember when we were doing the hiring of the development team, and it was very hard for, Michaela, remember even during the interview process, there were a lot of applications from male because the software development space or the IT space is still male dominated. so it was very difficult for us to also find women or women of color as well within that space, you know. So I think when you reflect back on it, especially within, I think working within this intersection of technology and art, but highlighting the technology space as well, that's where now there is a lot of consideration. I mean, I know that, yes, there were certain points that we had to, certain criteria that we had to follow for this particular fund regarding, gender equality, etc., and questions that we had to answer in our reporting regarding our hiring. But I don't think that we were very intentional or specific about just working with women or just working with men or just working with, the LGBTQI plus community, Yeah, I think it also just happened organically. Yeah, I think that's the word that I'm looking for. And I think it probably happened organically because of the people in the positions of leadership already that, at the back of their minds, they're always considering those things, or those qualities when it comes to building a team as well, and how it will have either positive or negative effect on the working environment. Okay, I don't know if you want to touch on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think finding a developer was the most difficult part. But in terms of gender, I think naturally, like in our networks and the people we work with, we just open to finding the right people. When it came to a developer, though, that was something that we very consciously decided, like we really want to find a developer maybe who isn't South African, who's a woman, definitely wanted to work with someone of color in that role, or someone who specifically understands the space of the arts or just aligns with our thinking and our approach. And yeah, luckily we found a teenie for that role who's been amazing, but we managed to build a small team actually of people who supported him, and we managed to work with Lois from Kenya as well. But I remember what was interesting is that during a time where things were maybe not going so well, or certain things needed to be spoken about and said, certain men in our team were very conscious of the fact that another team member was a woman, and they would speak to them differently or have a higher level of tolerance, or phrase the way they spoke differently because of the fact that they were women. So not in a negative way, but technically it could be in a negative way for the team. So I think gender can become, it can be a bit not dangerous, but
Obstacle?
misleading if people focus on that rather than the work at hand, I think if you have integrity in the work and you are having candid conversations and being open about the processes and working together, that should be the way that things go rather. But yeah, other than that, finding the team, there were obviously criteria from our funders as well, like this percentage need to be women, this percentage need to be South African. Well, actually, most of them needed to be South African in this case because it was part of the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture's mandate. But we tried our best to go outside of that. And I think just find the best people for the role and then catch up afterwards where we had to tick boxes in catering, or who we used to print stuff, or that kind of thing. But I think just naturally what happened is that we did tick all the boxes without necessarily consciously having to make that our priority, if that makes sense. Because I think our world is just made up of diverse people. It was more the technical side of things that was the challenge, to find people in those spaces in design and development because we had no existing network.
I want to throw something a bit random out there. Maybe it's not random, but just to Michaela's point about having a moment where gender was something that was highlighted, or we were made aware of how sometimes it's hypersensitive rather in a team. I think what became interesting was, I think, the fact that our way of working, Teresa mentioned that we were working digitally online. We were coming from all these different spaces and backgrounds and knowledge reference points. I wonder if it would have been difficult to have a conversation about the presence of sort of gender sensitivity or tiptoeing around gender in a working environment if we were a different kind of team. Does that make sense? So facilitating the need to be able to say, oh, I want to be sensitive to gender and I don't want to overstep or say the wrong thing. I wonder if the space that was kind of created through this communal working afforded that conversation the opportunity to take place. Whereas in other places, I don't know if people feel as comfortable just pointing out that, oh, I'm so hyper aware that I'm working in the tech space or in this space with a different gender and I want to be careful and I want to be respectful. How do I do that?
Yeah. It's funny because it's kind of, to Teresa and Michaela's point, it's almost like those things were instinctual, organic, natural responses. So it's very difficult to say, like, we created an environment. I mean, I think we did hyper focus on the notion of process and the fact that we wanted to work through different processes with each other in order to, one, learn, but two, also engage with a group of people who could weigh in on this thing, because we had no expectation of being the ones to write what this app could be or should be. And so that hyper awareness, I think maybe it does instill a sense of like, this is an open space for people to be sensitive to each other, to make their knowledges known and to be considerate. And I'm trying to think how we did it in the form of meetings because it was all remote. So we kind of had to like be engaging with each other in these bubbles. But yeah, I'm trying to think or, kind of construct something from that, even though we're saying it was like just organic. We flowed through these decisions or these ways of thinking quite easily.
Yeah, I was about to use the word considerate as well. I think, yes, it was organic, but there was a lot of consideration. And yes, I mean, like we had the criteria from the mandate from the funding that required us to think about these things. But I think also the individuals who were at the leadership position, who were women, also came with those values as well into the project. And even within the hiring process as well and the interviews, there was always consideration of those aspects of, a healthy working environment, and hence we also started applying our reflective methods as well. And I remember we spoke about this even way in the beginning when we were starting to consider monitoring and evaluation, and I had suggested that we do a few reflections, like obviously our weekly meetings. And then after we submitted, I think it was our first report as well, we started the whole questioning as well, like asking our can I call them staff, our project team, our project team to just tell us about their process, answer a few questions. And also we had like inverted commas, performance reviews, where we checked in with our interns, and our entire team just to see where people are at. And I think even in those conversations, Michaela and Tam, if you look back, you know, I remember with one of the interns within the development team, she was very honest about, how great her experience has been in terms of learning from our software developers, and our UIX developers. And I think the experience was also very different when she was under a male UI developer and a female UI developer, which was so interesting as well, you know. both positive, but she also found, I think, what's this? More valuable feedback. And I think also because of the time, obviously we don't have time right now to contextualize it. But yeah, I think the word that we're looking for is that, yes, we think it might have happened organically, but I think because of how the leadership team was also formed, which is all women, there was a lot of consideration as well regarding the decisions that we were making and what informed the decisions and how we were, considerate of this team and this team actually working well, despite the challenges that any other organization might have during the process of the work. Yeah, so I think it also goes back to us as well and the values that we individually carry, but also I think the values that founded Art Meets Collective as well, which for me as an outsider, it always transpired, especially in like the meetings that we would have on the side regarding our challenges. I saw how you guys worked out conflict. Um, you know, I saw also, I think at the end during the testing when we had the previous Art Meets App, what's this? Art Meets App friends coming together and how they spoke about, the process and engagement and how you guys are always considerate of just, bringing back the people that you started with, in these conversations of developing and building and improving, the app and the project.
You're reminding us really important things that we think we forget that it's not universal. And the thing that I was thinking about when you were speaking is, of course, we could construct work or labor as a form of productivity, So like by the end of this period, we need to have a very functional working app and da 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 da. And like I think through the project, not to say we kept moving the milestones, but we kept realizing like the capacity we do have, the capacity we don't have, like how do we drill down and make something more meaningful for us, rather than a tick box activity or a kind of milestone marking process. And I think one thing that we collectively acknowledged was that we don't want work to be a trauma response. And so that notion of having, not to say that it's about the fact it's about having a male leader and not having a female leader, but or a woman leader, femme leader. But the idea that work doesn't have to be a trauma response, that it can be the place that everyone finds their purpose, what they want to do, how they want to do it, and then it's really people around each other working towards what they each identify as the best thing for them. And I know for us, again, this is not the place to contextualize, but work not being a kind of trauma reaction of deadlines and goals and deliverables. And I think the app is meant to be that question to us is like, how do we make something that attends to us as humans, rather than a mere like making productive of yourself, of your soul. Yeah, but thank you, Teresa. That was like a really useful way of reflecting and thinking of like how did we put forward steps that allowed us to move like gracefully through difficult things or gracefully through like very challenging circumstances or difference, simply just difference.
Yeah, I mean, all these relationships that we build are super important. And that's something that kind of worries me now, in terms of maintaining that communication, because obviously it wasn't an ideal situation. We get this, lump sum of funding where we have this rhythm and this momentum, and we are building and in constant conversation with people in our community helping us do this. And the money runs out and we no longer have that team. It's kind of just us left who are voluntarily part of this because, you know, we have the vision and we see that we'll get there. But yeah, I mean, we're in a space where we don't have a developer permanently. We don't have really anyone left besides us and a little bit of money for new designs. So I think for me, that's kind of the worrying space is like people have input all this energy and you have this vision and it's still there. But how are we going to move it forward and how are we going to make something of these contributions that everyone has so generously been part of, you know? And what do we say to people along the way when we don't actually, like we might know when the app's going to be in the app store, but then beyond that, do we know how it's going to stay there and how it's going to grow? So yeah, that's what like makes me a little bit uncomfortable is not being able to be in communication with our testers and stuff like that. But I think what's also important to talk about is more than gender is the geographical aspect of what we were doing, because that's where Siviwe came in. And that was always something we obviously were very conscious of, is not wanting to just work with people in the centers, right? And with our existing networks in Joburg and Cape Town specifically, like to make sure that we include Durban and we go to places that are outside of the urban centers, because that's who we want the app to be able to start including. And Siviwe's project for Afri and the Fold was a way to help us do that, because obviously we wouldn't have those existing relationships with the practitioners in the Eastern Cape who she was working with. And having Siviwe working on her podcast on the ground with people and then kind of looping us into it by using the app to platform that content, that was a really valuable, really, I mean, I think it's actually a really key part of the app and how it progressed and is going to still progress. I mean, Siviwe is still in conversations with us about how to build out certain features in a way that accounts for like more remote spaces or, you know, the challenges that are experienced there in terms of naming of locations, plotting of locations. Of course, she's working a lot with language, which our app itself doesn't necessarily do much to accommodate at the moment. I think there's also the point where we had to be really realistic, because there's only so much you can do in a short period of time. But I think the point is to maintain that bigger goal of where we want it to be. We want it to be a more collaborative, more inclusive platform that does take all of these things into account. But it's about starting somewhere and then responding to users, and obviously having the capital and the team to be able to keep those things in place. Otherwise, you try to move too quickly and you end up just letting people down with a product that isn't, up to scratch.
Yeah, I think this is also important divergence for the question of like what we wanted on the app and then what inevitably transpired onto the app. And I think it's always been important to deal with people, projects, communities, networks that kind of we give and like others give back. So like being reciprocal, being able to exchange. And I think as we were sitting and going through who our focus groups could be, so, you know, like what kind of projects and what kind of places were we imagining to be on the app, and to like facilitate these difficult questions about like what an app and what kind of technology this thing should reproduce. It was important to think, as Michaela said, about geographies that are not mapped. And not to say they're not mapped as in they don't exist, but to say they're not mapped as in they're not attended to for certain kinds of services, certain kinds of connections, certain kinds of inclusiveness. And Siviwe completely stepped into that role and showed up in so many ways. And I think it also attests to the question of like where art is right now, and I guess art constantly being this revolutionary space to like rewrite what we are and where we are and what we're doing. And so then, I mean, I wasn't involved in so many of these sessions, but that drilling down into the technicals of like, okay, so how do we want this app to respond to geography? How do we want this app to respond to like issues of language and place? And I still don't think we've resolved that, but it attests to the thing of like, can we build something that's our own or that's for us? And maybe this is just another growing pain for why we're at this kind of pause moment, I think, for the project is yeah, trying to figure that out and think through it. And Siviwe shows up for that, which is amazing.
Yeah, one more thing that I think is nice to add is that what Afri and Siviwe's project did is also kind of challenge our intentions with the app as a visual arts platform, and how we decide how it's curated, right? Because, I mean, African Fashion Research Institute, I know they work with artists across different disciplines, but you know, it's fashion driven, fashion led, and working with practitioners and people who are not necessarily artists, kind of questioned for us like how we tailor profiles or who is on the app as individuals, how we write about projects or map projects that involve individuals who are not artists or arts professionals. And I guess what we view or who we view as artists and art professionals.
I was going to ask, you don't think that's like a really exciting way of challenging who we think are artists and also maybe showing how connected artists are to communities and to spaces that, you know what I mean? And I think in a way, a lot of art worlds or art bubbles are constructed around the identity of a gallery, for example, or a city or a, you know, like interlinking industries. Whereas the challenge here was to think about art not so much connected into like the urban fabric so much, but art connected to, not to say even a rural fabric, but communities of people that have nothing to do with art
Art
industry.
markets.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so
Yeah.
this for me is the interesting question. It's like art is so linked, connected to these spaces, and yet we don't think of it innately like that, or we don't suppose it should be so. And yet art is in these fabrics. Sorry, I'm maybe using like words that are on the nose, but
Yeah.
the project really showed us this at a critical level. It's like art
Yeah.
connected to people that we don't think about, to spaces that we don't think about. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's where we kind of not resolved, but made a loose decision to curate the app according to partners and according to projects rather than deciding if an individual is an arts professional who should be on the app. Because it is difficult, like once you start saying, okay, yeah, it's also for musicians, when you haven't even got it right for the industry. I know, okay, of course we're saying that there's lots of overlaps, but I don't know, scale is something that we have to be very conscious of and not kind of get ahead of ourselves at the beginning. And working with project partners is a perfect way to kind of do both things without like scaling and losing sight of our original intention.
But then in a way, it's also like you can't work with community and networks and in some way not respond to scale, if that makes sense. Or be able to hold the idea of scale, that this is not a one person thing, or this is not, like yeah, it's the web of that is much wider.
Maybe not scale, but user groups or audiences, I suppose. Like if you're trying to cater to like a cultural industry in general, where you're going to have like theater performances and like every band that's playing all over, it kind of not dilutes, but it's just harder to keep track of the people you work with and your intentions. And I don't know, it kind of, even though it's broadening it narrows down for me, I think, at the start. It's something we have to figure out along the way for sure.
But I think the figuring out can happen organically, just off the basis that even our collaboration with Afri and Suviwe happened out of, once again, that community and that network and a collaborative spirit. So you have to sometimes trust that if you lead with that intention of collaborating or networking or communing together because you have a shared passion or vision, then there's room for this sort of scope to grow, but on the basis of how do these relationships serve each other, as opposed to just doing it for the sake of doing it.
Yeah, but I think now when you building an app, right? Something which is also which requires and demands structure, and a lot of consideration as well regarding the engineering behind it. I think that's where now you it puts you at a position where, you need to measure. And I think for myself and Michaela, at some point it was one of those things where we were just it was sometimes over our heads, because our background isn't in IT, or software development. So yes, I mean, having the fold part of this process was a great way of, I think, challenging us, etc. But also, at some point, it also now required us to now start thinking. And I mean, great thing Atini was on board as well. About what is realistic regarding, what we can host, what the app can host, what it can't host, and now you start talking money again, you start talking technology, so the language even changes when you work now within that technology aspect of it. Because I think also that's another thing with us artists, yes, we love the experience of working organically and, things just happening the way they need to happen and allow it. But when you now work in a structured environment like technology, I remember, for example, I remember a friend of mine who's in IT, I was just confiding in her about, oh yeah, and this is in the beginning of working with a teenie. And Michaela wanted a teenie to basically submit a report every Friday, and we were struggling a bit with a teenie doing that. And I remember confiding in a friend around, how should we manage this? And she was like, but you guys are artists, you guys are creative practitioners, you guys are project managers. You're able to do that. You function that way. IT people don't function that way. They do, and there's no time for them to be sitting down and writing reports. There's someone else who does that. And I was like, oh yeah, true. So it's also us having to acclimatize to that world, and I think that's where Michaela's coming from. Michaela, you can correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of yes, we want to work with these communities, etc., and within this environment. But at the end of the day, what the app is requiring us to do as part of the engineering process is also measure, and be realistic about how much or what it can take or what it can't take, and what it needs in order for it to accommodate certain elements as well that let's say maybe a case study like the fold is bringing into this territory, that we also never necessarily really envisioned in the beginning, but now we're taking it on because we're just okay, let's take on this process and see where it takes us, And I think that's why Michael is also saying, I think working with per project that's what I think that's what would allow us to also now pace ourselves as well, in terms of understanding the process as well. And I think meeting our development team halfway, because I think they've also been quite patient with us as well and quite accommodating, and have allowed us to also learn a lot from, this side, that we're not familiar with. So I think that has also been, I think, a blessing and a privilege as well, in terms of the team that we've built. Um, um,
Yeah.
And I was just thinking about it now. I think that this point that you're making between Michaela and Teriso is also asking the question of technology and the representation. But I do think we've covered a lot of what we wanted to talk about in our notes, talking points.
Cool. I think it was nice as well just to hear that and to be part of this reflection, I think, for ourselves too. Just to realize the people we've had opportunities to work with, how cool our team is, and like also just people we've built relationships with before. And I think, Teresa, that's something you've managed to like consistently bring us back to just by virtue of being a newer part of the team, which is really important. So yeah.
Oh,
yeah, and I also think, I mean, like, thinking about values, I mean, it's like when I joined the team, even in our contracting, Michaela, I don't remember writing these are art meets like camera PTY LTD values, and this is what you need to abide in. Because I mean, when you join big organizations or even small organizations, they always have like a value system, and then you join them and you're just like, okay, where are these values, that you have highlighted on your website? I don't see, ex-manager upholding them. And I think for me, that's one of the reasons why I ended up, freelancing, because I just wanted control over my own environment and my own time, and not, be too involved in organizational drama. And I mean, like, you can never get away from it because we're humans at the end of the day. We slip, we have tempers, we've got personalities. But now I'm thinking, I wonder what it would mean for Art Meets Camera, or even Art Meets app, to have like a value system, or a value, whatever, like, yeah. And then how it would read as well, on paper. If you guys would sit down and actually think about, oh, what values did, or maybe this is something that we end up asking the team, to describe for us in terms of, yeah, or maybe us going back to our notes, and the conversations we had with Atini and, every single member, and see like what the themes were when they only spoke positively about the experience, But like I said, I mean, going back to those reflections and those meetings that we had, like our performance reviews, I think for me, they were great learning points, and experiences regarding how to manage a team and how to lead a team.
You guys think maybe that's a nice place to end the recording?
What does it mean to collaborate? Not just in form, but in spirit. In spaces like these, we are constantly asked to grapple with our politics of inclusion. Is it performance or is it practice? Do our collectives echo the values we profess, or are they shaped by quieter, deeper mechanisms that make care, access, and integrity feel real. For those of us working in women-led spaces, there's often a pressure to perform a kind of labor that responds to harm, to hold the aftermath, to soothe the wounds of institutions. But what if that's not our work? What if the power of women's collaboration lies not in reaction, but in reorientation? Beyond the box of gender, beyond the limits of expectation, we are here to push our own intentions into the center, to build not from scarcity, but from soul, to create not only for the structures that exclude us, but in service of the emotional, creative, and communal nourishment we owe ourselves and each other. Thank you to the Art Meets team for offering up these generous reflections, for veering into both the speculative and the tangible, for modeling what it means to practice care and curiosity in equal measure. To stay in dialogue with their work, follow Art Meets on Instagram and download the app to explore a growing ecosystem of creative practitioners across the continent. This conversation forms part of Imiphindo kwaXhosa, a polyvocal sonic intervention weaving memory, language, and return. Siyabulela.